Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and it's Wednesday, so that means I have with me
DCN and JOC editor Lindsey Cole.
And she's got a whole bunch of headlines for us.
I do, yeah. I actually have inadvertently kind of gotten a theme of the project edition for this episode. It's highlighting a number of projects, be it just a cool project story or some controversy surrounding some projects. So I'll start out east like I usually do. Don recently did a story on a massive development in the Downsview community, which is kind of in the central west area of Toronto. I'll preface by saying, yes, it has a 30-year build out. It is quite a time frame. Yep. But it's recently won a Toronto Urban Design Award because of its vision and its master plan. Essentially, it's on 520 acres in the community that I mentioned. But what I think is cool about it is it is slated to provide homes for 80,000 to 110,000 new people. So
that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. I know that's over a span of quite a few years, but we are in a housing crisis, so it's interesting to see this development be planned out and come to fruition. Supposed to have 47,000 workers, and it's a mixed-use project too. In fact, it's even the city of Toronto has said it's kind of unlike anything in the city's history. So it's progressing. There's still, they're looking at getting secondary plan approval in the spring of 2024. So there's obviously a few hurdles to jump through still. But what I think is cool about the story itself is that it goes into detail about what the project will entail and what it means to the community, as well as, some steps it has to carry out to make it happen. So certainly kind of a good news story, I suppose, on a forward-looking project. The other thing I had that I thought was interesting that actually isn't well, it is project related because it relates to every single project that people are working on. We had a podcast featuring Dan Leduc.
That was the last one.
That was the last one we had. So in follow-up to that, Angela did a story. It all stems, he recently spoke at the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction's conference in Toronto. And I know in your podcast, Warren, he kind of speaks to prompt payment in Ontario, but also across the spectrum in Canada. But Angela's story specifically focuses on prompt payment in Ontario. And what I think is telling that he was saying is that it's not really working the way it should. So what do I mean by that? Because, a heck of a lot of work went into creating prompt payment legislation, and, many aspects of it do work and are being modeled and mimicked elsewhere. But I think what's pretty interesting about what Mr. Leduc was saying is it's actually kind of the industry that's holding it back.
Which surprised me. That's not usually how it works.
No. So maybe because of the pandemic, he attributed it to that to some extent, and just because the way the industry's worked for so long, you're not getting paid, you kind of just potentially sit on it. But he says, and I quote, "If on day 35 you're not paid, day 36 you're picking up a phone. You have to challenge, you have to chase your money." So it seems kind of like a simple concept, but it's actually, you don't want to maybe ruffle feathers with whomever you're working with, or there may be other variables that you don't want to reach out and say, "Hey, pay me." But at the end of the day, say, "Hey, pay me."
Yeah. When I talked to him, it kind of came down to inertia because it's been the other way for so long, and a lot of corporate culture, not corporate culture, but just the overall culture of the industry has been the way it's been. So it takes a little while to get used to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not unlike what we've seen in other areas of construction, being, adapting to new technologies or other facets. But, I think when it comes to everybody's about the bottom line at the end of the day, if you're, so it's kind of simple to maybe step out of that comfort zone at times when needed. So I thought it was a great analogy when he said that so much effort has gone into essentially giving you what, quote, a scissor lift with prompt payment, and you're still using a wooden ladder. So it's time to just evolve a little bit. So it's a pretty cool story that Angela did, and obviously, if you haven't checked it out, the podcast as well featuring Mr. Leduc would be very interesting to listen to on the prompt payment front.
And I have to say, having seen him like here in Vancouver, if you ever get a chance to see him at an event you're at, do so, because he's the only person, and I told him this personally, that has made prompt payment funny. Like, he's a very funny guy, and so I'm like, how am I laughing at a CISC conference? This seems unlikely, but I was. So.
Well, that absolutely speaks volumes then, doesn't it? And often that can be the best way to attract an audience is through humor. So good on him. So in kind of sticking with the overarching project stories, we have one that kicks off our demolition feature for October. It's by John Bleasby, a freelance writer with us. Essentially, it is about the process of decommissioning, deconstruction, and then demolition in that order. So, while it might be nice to see all these implosions and pretty cool buildings coming down, sometimes demolition isn't always the best option right off the hop. And then there's obviously steps to be taken before that, decommissioning being one of them, and then deconstruction and then demolition, as I said. But I think where the story goes further than that is basically taking a look at the building as a whole and then breaking it down and seeing what can be reused, salvaged, donated, or even tossed. Obviously at the end of the day, there's going to be some waste, but it's just taking a look at what the existing stock has and then trying to make a plan around that. So that story kind of highlights some stakeholders' opinions on that and where technology might play a role, and even, some policies that could be put in place to reiterate taking a look at the whole building before just taking it down. That's basically it on the eastern side. Of course, that John Bleasby piece can apply nationally, but kind of moving over.
So can the Dan Leduc one when you get right down to it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. But taking a look at the western side of things, so I thought I would highlight two massive projects that are also facing some hurdles, or at least were. One definitely still is. So the first one I thought I took a look at or highlight for you guys is a massive project in Vancouver that the Squamish Nation is spearheading. We've reported on it several times before. It's going to be basically at the foot of the Burrard Street Bridge. And it's supposed to have 600 rental units, and it will be funded by $1.4 billion in federal loans. Previously, when it broke ground, Trudeau said, and former Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart said, the development is the largest First Nation economic development in Canadian history. So where am I going with this? Essentially, there's a court battle that was happening, and the BC court has recently rejected a challenge to the project. So essentially, a residents association was launching a suit because they felt like they weren't consulted enough on this project. They're called the Kitts Point Residents Association, and but basically the court threw that out and said that there wasn't enough, grounds to stand on, and as a result, the legal challenge didn't proceed. So probably good news for the development. I don't know how the residents group's probably not too pleased, but that is kind of a latest development on this story, and we're kind of continuing to see where it goes, not only on the political side or the legal side of things, but actually just the construction of this project itself. It has a number.
It's going to be big.
It's going to be big, and it has a number of really cool factors that environmental and sustainability measures that they're hoping to implement in the project. So, yeah, for our audience, it's right up our alley when it comes to our coverage.
Oh, totally.
So, yeah. The other one, I think you know where I'm going to go with this one, Warren, but the other project that we're...
The slightly optimistic tone of the previous story is out the window on this one.
Essentially, we have a recent update to the beleaguered North Shore wastewater treatment plant. We've reported on this extensively in the past. There's been a lot of concerns with the, former GC on the project was dismissed, and they had built some of the project, but there's still a lot to go, and legal battles are going back and forth in court about who's responsible for what. And essentially, in June 2022, AECOM was tasked to complete the design, and PCL Constructors West Coast is now the construction management role. But what the new development is essentially Metro Vancouver's board is developing a task force to review what options are available to complete this troubled project. So, well, kind of, you know, a little bit mysterious on the details about what does that mean. They're basically saying and I quote, "This project has experienced extraordinary circumstances that have come at an unfortunate time of extreme market volatility in Canada." So they're striking up the task force to look at options for delivering the project, mitigating cost impacts for the region, etc. So again, it's very minimal details that we have at this point.
Yeah. And we did ask, I'd like to point out, we asked, and we basically got, as if I may paraphrase, we'll tell you something when we got something. It's a little more formal than that, but that was the basic answer we got from them about it.
Yeah, exactly. When they kind of lay out the parameters of what the task force is going to take a look at and go forth from there. And I guess we'll see what this means once the outcome is and the terms and everything is released and revealed. We'll see what's going to happen. But I mean, this is just taking a look at the renderings and then the actual construction itself. This is a huge project that is basically very much so needed. And it's just been riddled with problems pretty much from the get-go. So, yeah. So we'll have to see where things carry out from there, but we'll certainly be keeping an eye to it, that's for sure, as we have been, as this story continues. So that is basically our news in a nutshell on many projects and many updates in the DCN and JOC news world.
Okay, cool. And up next, we have an interview with BCIT School of Construction and Environment Dean, the new Dean, Dr. Guido Wimmers. And he talks about his new role and what he did previously in Europe and here in BC and how he sort of emphasizes sustainability. And that's up next. With me today, I have
Guido Wimmers, Dr. Guido Wimmers. I'm the new Dean of the School of Construction and the Environment at BCIT.
That's where I'd like to start. What are your initial impressions? You've been on the job, I think, a few weeks now, and I took over from Wayne Hand, and it's a whole new world, I assume. So what are your new impressions of the job and of the campus itself?
It's a whole new world. You're absolutely right. It's at times it has been a little bit overwhelming because the school is really big. So there are from various different trades and other types of degrees all the way up to master degrees. There's a very wide portfolio of things offered in the school.
Okay, and this is not your first time working with trades and higher education in BC. You previously worked with UNBC. So what did you learn there that you're bringing to this role?
I'm learning a lot currently being in this new role, and it's quite fascinating. But I mean, I've been in contact with BCIT since I don't know, more than 10 years for sure. I've been in active contact every year as either a guest lecturer or a critique for some various programs. So I always stayed in touch with BCIT, and I was always intrigued by this institution and all the different things it does. So now in my new role, it's much more kind of a management role compared to what I've had before. But so far it has been fun, and it's really fascinating.
And what were some of your roles previous to this? I mentioned UNBC, but even before that, you were working on sustainability stuff, I believe.
Yes, at UNBC, I was in charge of setting up an entirely new wood engineering program. So I was a chair of a new master degree and those kind of things, including building up the infrastructure for this program. So that has had its challenges on its own. But now at BCIT, the scope is larger, it's bigger. And hey, that's what I came for. This is what I like to do. But yeah, so that's a very positive thing for me as well, to really grow into this new position.
But even previous to that, I believe you were in Europe and you were doing a lot of work with sustainability and the like.
Yeah, I mean, my background. So I'm both. I'm a registered architect in Europe, and I'm a professional engineer here. So I understand both languages, if you will, the ones of the architects and the engineers. And my focus always has been on energy efficient buildings, truly energy efficient buildings, such as passive house and those things, as well as modern fabrication, wood design, and prefabrication, those fields, because they kind of go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. And just well, just generally, I guess Europe is widely seen as kind of the leader for passive house and definitely for wood design, but BC is kind of catching up. What is your impression, having seen both sides of that?
It is a very it's a very interesting and fascinating field of tension. So. As you're probably aware, here in BC, we've done some really excellent work as well. But in the big picture, you're right. The leaders in various different fields are still can be found in Europe. It is a little bit of catching up. At the same time, there is some innovation where we deliver new solutions for those kind of problems. So it's not a copy and paste thing. So it's really about figuring out how can we do it in the best way in our province.
And just in terms of getting this job, was it this guy's got the skills we need, or was it also this guy fits with the skills we already have in terms of sustainability and wood design, which I know are things that BCIT has been sort of emphasizing in the last couple of years?
I think, I think it's a little bit of both, in a sense that so first and foremost, a dean's primary function is to manage, right? But in addition, I think I bring in quite a bit of knowledge into this field. So the School of Construction and the Environment, a fairly big chunk of it is this kind of work I've done in the past, both in the industry out there. I mean, I've worked in engineering and architectural offices in various countries, and also in the academia world. So I think the having the topic experience really helps me as well.
And also BCIT is bringing in the Trades and Technology Complex, which I think is the biggest building or project they've ever done so far. And that's something that I would assume the School of Construction and Environments can be fairly intimately involved with.
That is absolutely right. Yes, I mean, whoever has been on BCIT's campus, you're probably aware of that the infrastructure needs a radical overhaul. So it needs the refreshment of buildings, and it needs to really react to the current changes we can see in the construction industry. So everything there has been built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or whatever it was. So it's really about time to upgrade and update buildings, and to also react to new kind of approaches to construction. So the building you were just referring to, the big picture idea is really to focus more on this integrated and interdisciplinary approach. We to achieve high performance buildings, to achieve prefabrication, those things, we have to have this interdisciplinary approach. We cannot continue to think in silos. There is this constant integration of various different trades and technologies with each other. And so with this building, we want to develop a learning environment where we exactly can basically replicate this and have various different programs working hand in hand with each other.
Now, I remember I did sort of a exit interview with Wayne when he retired, and he said one of the biggest challenges was, no surprise here, COVID, and how they had to adapt, or you, I guess, the department had to adapt to teaching people without them being there, or or spacing people out. It's probably less of a worry there with spacing people out. But have you taken any of the best practices from then and sort of adapted them to now, because it helps you expand?
Yes, we did. So I mean, there has been discussions about working remotely or learning remotely, so any kind of online variations before COVID. But I think COVID has shown us in many different ways what is truly possible. So our society has been much more open, and obviously BCIT has been much more open to this. Now, post-COVID, so to say, we have to figure out the sweet spot. So to keep some aspects of remote learning. But then again, I'm very much convinced that the direct contact with instructors and with the peers amongst each other is a very important part of the learning experience as well. So really figuring out the sweet spot, how to run it in future from here on, the mixture between in-person and online training, that's one of the ongoing challenges. I think our current setup is actually already quite good, but that's something we will learn and adapt over the coming years.
And I would assume, given that this has been kind of a theme for BCIT for a long time, interacting with industry in a way that, say, UBC doesn't, because it's a different setup. Is that something that's going to continue, especially with this new trades complex and the School of Construction and the Environment as well?
Yes, that's clearly a goal of mine, to continue this kind of this kind of collaboration and deepen it further. So really working actively with various different companies out there from basically all kinds of fields, and it doesn't really matter if we talk about trades, if we talk about the technology sector. So I really want to have an active engagement of the industry in the BCIT realm and being part of it.
And I guess finally, I'd ask, there is a labor shortage, but also you're building this trades complex, obviously, because there's a demand. So just sort of on an anecdotal level, what do you see in terms of the new intake of kids, well, not kids, like, they're adults by now, they're 18, 19, but new intake of young adults coming in, or even older people coming in to learn the trades? Do you see sort of like a level of enthusiasm you haven't seen before?
I do. I mean, on the one hand side, you're right. The numbers do not necessarily reflect that. There are some areas where we are running short and the industry needs more than we have, generally speaking, not just BCIT. And it has to do something with how attractive some of the trades seem to be for young students or young adults. So that is one of the things we have to overcome, and that's a joint effort of not just BCIT, but all the other colleges, including then also the industry, to make sure that there is a much better understanding about the chances and opportunities various different trades will offer. The other thing is, and that ties a little bit into what I was referring to earlier, interdisciplinary approaches. It's not this silo thinking anymore. It's a little bit more holistic approach how to build buildings today than it was 20 years ago. And that, of course, is getting a bit more attractive as well. And some of the biggest disadvantages we've seen with trades is working out there in the rain or snow, for that matter, in basically any kind of condition. With prefabrication, that will also change to some degree. So the job profile of how an electrician will operate tomorrow versus yesterday is changing. So the work environments do change. So this all together ties it together, the chances, opportunities, but also the challenges we are facing for the next few years to come.
Okay, Guido, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And that's it for this episode, but you can listen to the Construction Record podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Music, and Spotify, as well as the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce websites. Thanks for listening.